a farm-working community fights the expansion of the nation's largest sites for hazardous waste.
They've educated themselves, they've taken the find out, and now they are exercising their rights in this democracy to say that their communities should not be the dumping ground for waste.
In Raleigh, North Carolina, four communities lock horns in a quality of life versus struggle over a form of pollution that's hogging the land.
Our community is being invaded by corporate America, and it is taking advantage of a people who have already been stepped on, walked on, beat on, spat on, and all the other ons that have taken place with African Americans.
West Dallas, Texas.
I'm tired, I'm sick of it, my mother, my father are dying, you expect me to say nothing?
Residents fight to rid their community of lead that has poisoned their children, their homes, and their lives.
And the image of a residential area that is compatible with garbage, what you're saying that the people are garbage.
They are pollution warriors fighting for their health and their civil rights. They feel violence has been done unto them, suffering from the crime of environmental injustice.
It's just not an issue of prejudice, where somebody doesn't like you because of the color of your skin. This is an issue that will take your life away.
Corporate funding is provided by Rubbermaid, proud to support this program, which encourages us to reduce, reuse, and recycle. Rubbermaid, for a brighter tomorrow. And by Tom's of Maine, makers of natural toothpaste and deodorant, part of our commitment to honor and sustain the natural world. With additional funding from the George Gund Foundation and Davis Conservation Foundation.
Hi, I'm Ira Flato. There is growing evidence that poor and minorities suffer the most from pollution and benefit the least from cleanup programs. This evidence had the backbone of the environmental justice movement and given rise to an unprecedented breeding of alliances. The feelings have been painfully simmering for some time. The belief that the environmental movement was the very people who were the primary to pollution. There has been a rationalized perception that people in poor communities already overburdened by poverty, drugs, crime, and joblessness were not interested in environmental issues. The fact is, nothing's further from the truth.
Communities of color have always been involved in these issues. It's just that lead in public housing or landfills and garbage dumps in black communities, these are not defined as environmental issues until these issues are now on the agenda, and no one can turn these issues back.
We will not allow Warren County to become a dump site. We will not allow...
Many people believe the justice movement got its start in the early 1980s in a small, predominantly African-American community in eastern North Carolina called Warren County. There, for the first time since the late 60s, African Americans and white activists joined together in protest in what's described as a merger of civil rights and environmentalism.
The whole environmental justice movement as a movement really took off in Warren County because this was a case study where people basically drew a line in the dirt and said no more.
Black and white together, ain't no stop.
I might catch cancer. I would like to live in peace, and I'll go to jail in peace.
For nearly 4 years, the residents of Warren County have been protesting the state of North Carolina's plan to transport PCB contaminated soil and fill in their community. When the trucks began to roll, angered residents decided they'd had enough. And in a non-violent act of civil disobedience, they blocked the road.
Here you had primarily a lot of African-American women and their children who literally laid down in the streets to block the trucks from dumping polychlorinated biphenyls, PCB, in a toxic waste landfill in their community. And here's an agricultural community where the aquifer level is very shallow near the surface, where most people have wells, get their drinking water from wells, and the thought that the state would pick this county of all of the 100 counties in North Carolina as a dumping site was just unthinkable.
It's worth every second of it.
Although the protesters were ultimately unsuccessful, they did focus national attention on the relation between pollution and minority communities. It also gave other grassroots groups the confidence to fight.
As they began to organize and stop those trucks, people in South Carolina and Alabama and Georgia began to say, hey, they're doing the same thing in our community. And we began to build a network. And that over the years now has expanded into a tremendous grassroots movement.
The Warren County incident triggered a whole series of investigations into the relationship between and toxics. In 1983, the General Accounting Office examined the placement of off-site commercial hazardous waste in 8 states in the Southeast. What they found was that 3 out of 4 were located in predominantly poor and African-American communities, in a region where African-Americans comprise only 20% of the population.
Now, that's disproportionate impact. That is not a random distribution. In other words, you only 20% of the population out of 4 of the landfills. And that's the first government study that actually documented this particular pattern.
Only in the diversity of our oppression are we able to clearly see the pervasive pattern of genocide and racism.
In 1987, the United Church of Christ's Commission on Racial Justice issued its first report on toxic wastes and the U.S. The report's findings stirred up a big national debate about the relationship between where people live, the race of those communities, and the location of the toxic waste facilities.
God bless you all.
What the 1987 report did was it verified, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that in terms of the location of toxic waste facilities, those are commercial, licensed, and those uncontrolled sites, those that are not licensed, you find an overwhelming and disproportionate amount of these facilities in African communities, in Latino American communities, and other people of color communities.
The report concluded that 3 out of every Hispanic and African Americans lived in areas with uncontrolled toxic waste sites. Reverend Ben Chavis, Executive Director of the Commission, coined this phenomenon, environmental racism.
Environmental racism is racial discrimination in environmental policymaking. It is the deliberate targeting of racial and ethnic communities for environmental facilities, hazard facilities like toxic waste landfills, incinerators. It is also the disproportionate presence, generation, sources of toxins like petrochemical facilities.
In 1992, the National Law Journal released a fine investigation of every U.S. environmental lawsuit on record in the last 7 years and the Environmental Protection Agency's performance at their Superfund toxic waste sites.
One of the things that became real to us in our data was that polluters in white communities get higher penalties for violating the law than polluters in minority communities, and that is not the case if you compare high-income and low-income areas. Their penalties are virtually the same.
The study also found that the government had taken longer to address hazards in Superfund located in minority communities and accepted less stringent cleanup plans.
You know, it's basically saying that people of color communities generally longer to get cleaned up, takes longer to get listed as for cleanup, and generally if a community happens to be an African American or Latino community, and these companies operate generally fine less if they operate in these communities versus white communities.
The EPA kind of concluded there is a problem, there is racial injustice, and yet it's of many factors, and they didn't look at concrete solutions.
Poor communities became tired waiting for government to act. That's how the Latino population in Kettleman City, California felt when Chem Waste Management, the country's largest toxic waste company, wanted to build California's first hazardous waste incinerator right in their backyard. Kettleman City was already host to Chem Waste Toxic Landfill, the largest one west of the state of Louisiana. And now they wanted to expand their existing facility to include a hazardous waste incinerator. Kettleman's a small rural town that has banked its survival on farming. Located in Kings County in central California's farm-rich San Joaquin Valley, Kettleman is a poor migrant community that is 95% Mexican-American. For 20 years, the city has been home to the nation's fourth largest waste dump. But it was the prospect of adding a toxic waste incinerator that finally lit the fire under Kettleman's more vocal residents.
I found out about it like 5 years ago when we were coming home from buying groceries. We found a flyer on our door, and it was this Skull and Bones. And it said incinerator meeting. And, at that point I said, well, my family had been suffering a lot of respiratory problems, and I thought, well, maybe this has something to do with it, and I decided to go to the meeting.
People in Kettleman feel they've spent their lives bombarded by environmental hazards of unknown risk. They live in the shadow of a waste dump in fields laden with chemicals, all of it out of their control.
I stopped working in the fields like about ago. I got very sick. I had valley fever, and I had eaten away a hole in my lung. The last time I worked in the fields, especially in a walking crew, I came out that day with hands from the hoe, and I just couldn't keep up. I couldn't keep up. And in the fields, you have to keep up.
Siempre que hay juntas de Chem Waste, hay que tomar nosotros el control, de no dejarlos hablar.
Kettleman was on the path to becoming a deadly town. Mary Lou helped create an organization called People for Clean Air and Water. Their intended mission was to stop the incinerator, and hundreds of willing residents signed on. The group produced an unprecedented alliance of migrant farm workers who persuaded farm owners to fight for their land.
It embarrassed us at the beginning because we're supposed to be more knowledgeable or intelligent persons in this area, and yet we had farm workers that came to us with logical concerns, and we figure they are very sound concerns, very realistic concerns that they face, and telling us that we're facing the same dangers.
The farmers have realized that if they allow yet another pollution source into the most productive agricultural valley in the United States, become the second worst polluted air basin in the United States, behind only Los Angeles, that their crops are going to suffer. And so they've taken a strong stand, and they've joined farm workers in his lands.
Farm owner Joe Maya feels a hazardous waste incinerator could place his produce and his livelihood in jeopardy. Having already survived LR and other scares, Joe and others know one more incident could trigger the death of farming in Kettleman.
We have to be real with the application of insecticides on our crops, because if we leave any residue of toxicity in our crops, we're ruined. We can't sell it. We lost all our investment.
The LR scare with the apples and the Pollutants scare in Bakersfield, they lost a lot of money, just with the perception that their product was contaminated. And if people find out that their produce is coming from an area where there's an incinerator, who's to say they're not going to ban that? Say it's contaminated.
Nobody has the right to engage in chemical warfare upon.
Coming to the aid of residents, Greenpeace helped shut down the Kettleman Hills toxic waste dump for a day in 1990 to call attention to the emerging struggle. Alliances with organizations outside the community are increasingly seen as helpful in bolstering a power base from which to organize.
You hear a lot about Greenpeace, but they don't come into town and start trouble. They come in and wake up the people and educate the people on how to take care of themselves. This is the way Greenpeace works. You know, they say, you know, we need for you for yourself. You know, we get accused of this, you know, of coming in and being an outsider. And so we need for you to, you know, want to do this, and that's exactly what they do.
I think the most important that Greenpeace brought to Kettleman City was the truth. We brought the truth about the dangers of landfills, the fact that landfills leak, including the Kettleman toxic waste dump run by Chem Waste, which has contaminated the groundwater, which has had very, very serious problems. We brought the truth that incinerators are not state-of-the-art, as Chem Waste likes to say, but incinerators will poison the community. They cannot completely destroy the waste, and they are in fact landfills in the sky.
Part of the community's anger stemmed from a belief that Chem Waste was once again targeting as another poor town that wouldn't fight back.
They run 3 incinerators, one on the south side of Chicago in a 78% African-American community, one in downstate Illinois in an 80% African-American community, and their third operating incinerator in Port Arthur, Texas, in an 85% black and Latino neighborhood. Now they're trying to come to Kettleman, which is 95% Latino. We don't think that's coincidence.
Basically, this facility, again, was put here because of the hydrogeology and the meteorologic conditions. It had nothing to do with the population and the fact that Kettleman City is in large part Hispanic. The other factor involved with why the facility is here is because it's halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles, which makes it also an ideal siting for getting materials from both of those metropolitan areas where there's a tremendous amount of industry.
Over the past decade, Chem Waste and its parent company, Waste Management Services, has been fined $38 million for violating environmental laws. This includes fines for illegal dumping and illegal burning of PCBs.
Chemical Waste Management has a terrible record of being, because of violations on handling their toxic waste, but they're not in the business of growing crops. They're in the business of generating big, large sums of money, and they can afford to pay the fines. We as can afford to lose our crop because that is our investment.
Large part of those fines have been either one from years ago when facility weren't as stringent as they should have been, and subsequently the EPA needed to show that they had teeth and were going to enforce, and so they did a number of investigations back in 84, 85, and issued some very large penalties. Now there are still some penalties that are getting issued at certain facilities that are very large, and again, it's so EPA is showing still have teeth.
Chem Waste also asserts that the incinerator will operate with 99% efficiency, a claim that's reinforced by an environmental impact report that projected the incinerator's risk.
I'm not a rocket scientist, but I know that if there's particulate matter coming out of this stack and it's going to fall back to the ground, then where's to say it's going to be safe? It's going to contaminate the ground.
We don't live in a risk-free society, and what you try and do is minimize those risks to the greatest extent possible. And with the technologies for incinerators, you can do that, and you can minimize the risk.
What we found historically is that companies like Chem Waste are notorious for not providing the whole story. The government, which is unfortunately we often find in close cooperation with companies like Chem Waste, also fails to tell both sides of the story, the whole truth, so that the people can exercise their rights in this democracy to make up their own mind.
Don't you get tired of dumping on Kettleman City? Once again, you're going to stick it to us?
It's great, and I would suggest also a bit of grandstanding for you to come at the very last minute and make these allegations.
For Kettleman residents, a key contention was that they have a voice in the decision-making process that led to the county's initial approval of the incinerator.
They don't have any direct representation on the county board, they feel. I don't know what to say to that. But I'm certainly not putting myself at any distance from them. I mean, anybody that's ever called I've talked to, and if their views disagree with mine, that's just one of the things that happens.
Not waiting for fate to play its hand in 1991, residents decided to sue ChemWaste. The suit the company had selected Kettleman as part of a broader nationwide pattern of placing toxic waste facilities in poor minority communities. But intent is difficult to prove.
Environmental racism is no different than any other form of racism, whether it's in housing, whether it's in employment, or voting. And what we are faced with today is the intent standard, that is having to prove that discrimination based on race is present when involving environmental policy.
One of the characteristics of the postmodern civil rights movement today is that you have to scientifically discrimination. You just can't make an allegation. Even the Supreme Court and the way the courts are ruling, you have to come in with statistical verification that discrimination exists.
There have been only 4 or 5 reported civil rights decisions around the environment. All of those have gone against the people who are fighting the polluting facility. Now, I think it's going to take some time to educate the judges and the legal system of claims.
I understood meetings weren't held here in the past. That's why I put this one here. That's what I was responding to.
That's why they sent you.
No, I decided the meeting would be here.
No, yo decidí que la junta.
I arranged for the site.
Yo hice los arreglos para que That's why they sent you here to occupy the position that you have now.
Porque ellos no quieren quedar en vergüenza que
Because they
quedes
don't want to
tú.
be embarrassed, so they sent.
The suit relied heavily on principles of environmental law, charged that Kings County had, at the time, deliberately excluded Kettleman's Spanish-speaking population from the decision-making process by conducting hearings in English.
In California and in federal law, there is a requirement that the public be included in environmental decisions. If you have a public that is 40% monolingual Spanish and you don't have any Spanish materials, you are not including the public in the law.
I think they treated us like, like we're a bunch of ignorants. They keep telling us that they don't translate all the ERI report because we wouldn't understand, or we don't understand their business, that, we have to have these businesses. And, statements like that make you feel pretty bad. You don't realize that you're being told you're dumb.
Kettleman's residents also felt counties had everything to gain and nothing to lose from the incinerator. None of the officials live in town, and the county stood to profit handsomely from it.
ChemWaste, through tax on their facility, currently provides about 8% of the annual revenue of Kings County. If the incinerator were to be built, they would provide up to 16%, or 1/6 of the entire county revenue. County decision-making, weighing that against this small community of Latino farm workers, are clearly going where the cash is.
In January 1992, Sacramento Superior Court Judge Jeffrey Gunther ruled in the citizens' favor, invalidating the board's approval of the incineration plan. The environmental impact report was also ruled inadequate analysis of the incinerator's effect on San Joaquin's air quality, the projected effect of emissions on farm crops, and alternative sites for the project.
We ended up briefing and arguing the environmental case and winning that. And part of the environmental case was that the judge said that because the people of Kettleman City had been excluded from meaningful participation in the permitting process, the whole process was no good.
They were being excluded from the process because of the language barrier. And finally, a state judge in California said that that cannot be. the case. You must go back, you must read studies, and you must make sure that the community has a chance to give the input that it is supposed to be allowed to do by law.
The Kettleman City case proved that forging unconventional alliances among citizens rich and poor, legal and environmental groups can spawn the power necessary to be successful.
Into whatever is going to affect your life. And the government is started as, you know, for the people. It's as a way of people letting government know what they wanted, what they needed. And somewhere along the line, you know, we forgot that we had the ability to do that. And this is what we have to get back to.
What ChemWaste has received is a rude awakening because the people of Kettleman have been educated, they've educated themselves, they've taken the time to find out, and now they are exercising their rights in this democracy to say that their community should not be the dumping ground for America's waste.
In a victory for Kettleman, ChemWaste has given up plans to build an incinerator. The ability to prove that residents have been victims of a system is not always as clear-cut as it was in Kettleman City. That's the case in North Carolina, where poor communities are being forced to endure an odd form of environmental pollution, hog generated by a new breed of large-scale corporate hog farm. Their story points out that leadership, timing, and hard evidence are critical components for an effective fight. And when they're not in place, it's an uphill battle. North Carolina is the nation's fastest growing producer of hogs, 4.5 million of them, and that accounts for 1/3 of the state's income. Driving this growth are large hog operations that have contracted out, and in some cases driven out, some of the smaller farms. Bringing in hogs was part of the state's plan for industry.
The increase has taken place in the past 5 years or so as people have looked for diversification in their small farming operations. Corn, soybeans aren't paying the bills.
This is not Farmer Brown and the family farm. This is Cargill, Murphy, Prestige, Field Carroll, Purdue. This is industry. This is not the small family farmer. And what these industries have done is come to North Carolina and taken full advantage of the family farmer was protected and there was no basic regulation. So they have come in here with their industries, opened these things up all over the state and polluted people's air and water, and then they claim that, oh, we're a farming operation and should not be regulated. And that's just garbage.
Many of the pork producers gliding along on a Senate bill passed in 1991 by North Carolina Senator Wendell Murphy. The legislation protects hog producers from zoning that would intensive livestock operations. Murphy's company, Murphy Farms, is one of the major hog producers in the country.
If a person wants to put a trailer home down, they have to go to the health department, they have to get a permit to put a field, they have to get a permit for a little well. However, if the same person wants to put in 24,000 hogs and put the manure from 24,000 hogs and spray it around and dig a big hole, they don't have to get a permit. They can do whatever they want to do.
They can put a hog operation anywhere is zoned agriculture. They can put a hog operation as long as they keep it 750 feet away from somebody's house. And 750 feet is not any distance for protection. It won't protect you. When we got hog operations that are stinking and sometimes 5 miles, 750 feet don't cut it.
Not all farmers think the recent growth is good. Gary's family has been working the land in North Carolina since the early 30s. He's seen firsthand how things have changed.
When you had small farmers raising piglets, they were dispersed, they were scattered. There were not 20,000 piglets on acres of land, let's say, even if it's that much. And we were not digging cesspools that were 30 feet deep, the same depth as our wells that we get our drinking water from. So the fact that they were dispersed did not cause any pollution problems because you didn't have all of this afterbirth urine and feces washed into what corporate America wants to call a lagoon, and it's really a cesspool, an open cesspool is what it is.
Many residents are seeing that the proliferation of hogs can have a devastating impact on the overall quality of their lives.
Here you can see all this algae growth right in all through here.
Ammonia on top of that water there.
This is the site that we just put the 60-day notice on under the Clean Water Act. So we'll see what happens.
One hog will produce about the waste of 8 people per day. So if you got 1,000 hogs, you got equivalent to 8,000 people. If you got 3,000 hogs, you got an equivalent to 23,000 people. If you got 20,000 hogs, equivalent to approximately 160,000.
We're getting mosquitoes the size of your finger. We're getting flies that hit your window that sounds like hell balls falling out of the sky. We're getting aromas that are not very pleasant to the nostrils, if you want to call them aroma. We're getting stench is what we're really getting.
Many believe the victims of this new industrial pollution are poor people. They have watched the corporate farms slip into the shoes of the old family farms, changing the face of their neighborhoods.
In the environmental context, we often find that communities have no idea that environmental hazards are going to be placed in their area. They're not asked what they think. They're not given a chance to comment on the project. And this just adds to certainly the view of African American and other minority communities that they are being unfairly treated.
Move around through the country and you look at areas where these plants and these hog operations are located, you can't deny reveals, you know, because from what we say, they're always located near people like myself.
I think a lot of people just don't realize that their conduct does have discriminatory impacts. I think that people view racism as a very ugly thing that is very visible and that they don't see themselves engaging in.
All of these predictions and these miracles that were supposed to happen had not happened.
Jetty Blank, a resident of Sandyfield, North Carolina, watched as the quiet little crop farm next door converted overnight to a major hog farm.
When we found out about the buildings was up and they were just about ready to go in operations, they should have a standard rules and regulations to keep these operations close to homes, because we deserve fresh air. We're human and we got feelings.
Jetty says the odors from the farm are so bad that her have stopped playing outdoors. People are afraid to drink their well water. Dead pigs have been found near their lawns. And everyone knows property values will plummet.
Our be depreciated because of this hog farm here. If we get ready to sell our homes and stuff in this community, who gonna want to buy them near a hog farm?
It's not only environmental racism, it is also economic racism, because this is one way to ensure that the property that African Americans have in their possession is of no value. No one wants to locate next door to a hog farm that has 40,000 pigs on it. So the thing just eventually depletes, which also again will make us completely dependent on white America.
Many supporters of hog farms believe that if you live in the neighborhood, then you should accept standards that come with it. But residents argue they were there first.
Now, our philosophy has been that suburban areas, urban areas, that's where your population centers are. But in rural areas, other folks are welcome, but they need to recognize that there's going to be dust, be noise at odd hours. There's going to be some odors. And if they want to enjoy the country lifestyle, they need to become part of it.
These hog operations are coming to the communities and creating the problems. It's not like there's a hog operation and then people in the suburbs start moving around it and begin to complain. It's exactly the opposite.
You're intelligent people, you wouldn't be here, and you want a good life. And that's what this is all about, not taking away the good life that we have.
Knowing the nation is difficult to prove, black and white residents have joined forces with the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund and the Land Loss Protection Project to go after a few of the larger hog operations. Based on the contention, there have been violations of the Clean Water Act.
What we're saying is that Prestige Farms, which has subcontracted with the Owens family to operate a hog facility on the Owens property, is discharging hog waste from their lagoon into a stream that eventually makes its way to a U.S. waterway.
Winning these legal suits will depend on the ability to trace the pollution back to the individual hog farms. Specifically, it must prove that chemicals present in the water weren't there before. In Wilson County, people like Rebecca Bass have had their wells tested, found them contaminated, attributed to the commercial hog farms. The problem that remains is getting someone to follow up on the findings.
No one is taking any initiative to find out why so many wells in this area have been contaminated. That's our problem to do. And that's just another red tape we're having to fight, is trying to find out why our wells were contaminated.
We've had a lot of difficulty in getting the health departments to come out and do the testing. They haven't wanted to get involved in this whole issue, and so it's just been through very persistent efforts that we've been able to get the health departments to come out at all.
When it sprays and rains, it runs right into here.
And it runs into this little stream.
Yeah, see, here, look between the two creeks.
Right here.
This is coming from the spray field, and see the algal blooms, and it looks kind of cruddy.
Residents are finding that they must take the initiative. Gathering conclusive evidence takes, and the accused are innocent until proven guilty.
Some companies will say that until you can show that our facility is directly linked to cancer or infant mortality or respiratory diseases, we ought to have a right as a company to leave that company in the community.
What I'm fixing to hand you out next, a copy and the names of every senator and representative from the prescribed Agriculture Department in the House.
While evidence is being collected, the community is not relying solely on the courts as their arena for battle. They are also pushing to change the laws themselves.
Itself is flawed. They are good environmental laws, but these laws were made by predominantly white congressmen, through input from industry and a variety of other sources that have excluded the points of view of these communities that are dealing with the problems.
I think it is an incredibly uphill battle, but I think it's one that needs to be fought. Other states have done it, where then Governor Clinton signed into law the animal waste disposal regs in Arkansas. And the chicken industry has had a lot of problems there, and they were able to get some regulations. And I think what will happen is that we'll just have to keep introducing it and keep working on it until it finally happens.
We want justice! We justice!
Residents have decided to put the heat on their elected officials, trying to get legislation passed that would repeal Murphy's Law and tighten the reins on the pork industry. Some are pinning their hopes on Representative Howard Hunter, whose bill would require that hog operations be regulated like all other industries.
I don't know how about it. You know what the problem is.
Get it out of there!
I'm hoping that we can point out that what we are doing is totally ridiculous.
All right.
It's a public health problem. Yeah. It's not just economics.
All right.
Right. We've got to drink that stuff. Yeah. We've got to breathe it.
All right.
We've got to put up with it.
All right.
And it's not fair.
Some people question Hunter's motives based on the bill's first run. It ended up in the Agriculture Committee, what many people say is the kiss of death. Although residents are still mustering support for the legislation, Hunter acknowledges its chances for passage are...
Pigs don't vote! Pigs pay no taxes! Pigs don't vote! Pigs pay no taxes! Pigs don't vote! Pigs pay no taxes!
But changing the political tide means convincing the state that the proliferation of hogs is a long-term ecological threat. Short run, it's a tough argument to make, especially when hogs are an industry from which North Carolina is currently profiting.
Here you come back to this very difficult kind of debate where states feel that if they have tough environmental laws, They aren't going to have good economies because they're going to drive away business. And this was something Louisiana has believed in for years.
Though the jury is still out in North Carolina, it does not mean the battle is over. Hogging is a complex problem, pressured by powerful competing interests. But people like Don Webb and Gary Grant will keep organizing and collecting the data they need to wage an effective battle.
We understand what is happening to us, that our community is being invaded by corporate America, and it is taking advantage of a people who have already been stepped on, walked on, beat on, spat on, and all the other ons that have taken place with African Americans throughout the ages, from the time of slavery right up till now. And no, we have said we will not sit back idly and watch our community be destroyed.
The deck was stacked far more in the favor of West Dallas. There, one of the largest and most visible minority coalitions is fighting for the cleanup of polluted soil from a lead smelter that operated for nearly 55 years. Calling itself the West Dallas Coalition for Environmental Justice, it wanted West Dallas to be declared an EPA Superfund site so it could get the federal resources and recognition their community desperately needs. Dallas remains a racially city with 8 out of 10 African Americans living in the majority of poor areas. 4 miles west of glittering West Dallas, a bleak, poverty-ridden community. It's been one of the early dumping grounds for the city's solid wastes.
So it basically has become a dump. It is basically associated with garbage. And when you get the image of a residential area that is compatible with garbage, what you're saying that the people are garbage.
Here was a perfect place to put, they didn't want it in the rest of the city, here was a perfect place to put industry that nobody else in the rest of the city or county wanted. So why not do a little southwestern version, if you would, and make it a permanent kind of plantation out there where you could put everything that was undesirable for the rest of the city in West Dallas.
One of the oldest and most controversial industries in the neighborhood has been the 63-acre Murph Metal secondary lead smelter, called RSR. It went into business in 1934 and is located near the Thomas Edison School 3,500-unit public housing project. At its prime, RSR pumped more than 269 tons of lead particles into the West Dallas air, what some describe as a toxic stew.
The smelter took in used batteries, cracked them open for the lead they could extract, and threw away whatever they couldn't use. And of course the solid waste from that process was spread out all over creation in West Dallas, that people were using it for gravel, for fill, for lining their driveways and sidewalks and stuff. And so their solid waste was in effect recycled into homes and lives as well that way.
The toxicity of lead has been known for some time. It's one of the most widespread environmental hazards in minority communities.
Medical experts will tell you that it decreases the IQ level of children, does permanent damage to your cognitive abilities. It also tends to settle in the bones, doctors have told me, so that you can have aching, arthritis-like pain in the bones. And I interviewed men in West Dallas who complained of that. They complained of sluggish thinking and sluggish movements and pains in their legs and their arms, particularly people who had worked at the RSR smelter.
As early as 1972, Dallas officials were informed that lead was finding its way into the bloodstreams of who lived in 2 minority neighborhoods, West Dallas and East Oak Bluffs. The Dallas Health found that living near smelters was associated with a 36% increase in blood level. The city was urging action, but nothing happened.
People have been written off. When black kids are being poisoned with lead, people are saying, so what? These are just black kids in the project. That is racist to the core.
I just believe the city was in on it. Wasn't in on it. Why didn't they do something? Why didn't they say, wait a minute, we can't allow them people to stay there, but they took the white out and allowed us to stay here. So that's saying, I think that the city, we was being used as guinea pigs.
In 1981, a major suit was launched with the help of attorney Fred Barron, who sued RSR on behalf of 370 children who lived near the smelter. The suit was settled later for $20 million. They also went after the EPA in Washington, asserting the EPA had taken no affirmative action to remedy they knew existed. Because of broad discretion granted federal agencies, the EPA's suit was dropped, but the children's case was won and settled $1 million. But the lead and related illness problems have remained.
It's like a nightmare, and it's depressing. It's upsetting because you know things that lead can do to a child, and I see the results daily of children being poisoned by this lead, and we're living in a hellhole.
In 1984, the state finally ordered that the smelter be shut down and that a cleanup 5-mile radius surrounding the smelter. The cleanup was monitored by the city, the state, and the EPA. In 1985, it was declared complete, despite warnings for disease control that the children living near the plant had lead levels twice as high as was considered safe.
West Dallas was pronounced clean in 1985, despite what the CDC had. No one wanted to go back in there. No one wanted to look at this community again. It was like, let's shut our eyes, let's move on to bigger and better things.
But West Dallas resident Luis Sepulveda felt the CDC's warnings should not be ignored. His own nephews and neighbors continued to explain health problems, prompting Luis to do an investigation on his own. With the help of Texas United's Jim Schoenbeck, they collected dust samples from inside Luis's parents' home.
The test came back with 7 chemicals: lead, arsenic, chromium, calcium, zinc, mercury. We were with the lead, and it came back at 2,300 parts per million. And I didn't know what it means. So when I looked at it, okay, so just we have lead. But after we found out that standards was 500, we said, wow, what in the world is going on here?
So that's when I told my son, because he said, you have 2 choices, Mom. Put a stick there for sale, or let's fight. I said, let's fight. And then together with the neighbors.
Now, this is probably about 15 to 20 acres of nothing but dump site. It's a crime to dump trash in your neighborhood, but we can have a lead smelter come in and literally dump stuff all over our community, sell the plant for $25,000, and me and you as taxpayers are going to have to clean it up through EPA funds.
In fact, Luis organized the West Dallas Coalition for Environmental Justice. Their goal was to have West Dallas designated a federal Superfund site, a designation that would give access to some $20 billion allocated for the toxic waste.
And the fact that we had these test results that we could show the state and EPA themselves brought swift attention from them, because they didn't want to be embarrassed about not finding things that already found out. And then you have to go out and just agitate the hell out of the issue.
What did they do to us? What did EPA do to us? What did they call us?
They said we were troublemakers, peace breakers, called names. And every time we go down there, they'd have about 40 or 50 police down there. And they put a write-up in the papers and said we could come in and look at the ruckus. When we got there, they said we couldn't go up, locked the elevators. Went down there one time, and we went up on the elevator, and they made all the old people come back down the stairs.
In order to get government to pay attention, Luis has found it takes more than agitation. Arguments must be supported by reliable research, which is sometimes hard to come by.
You have to know what you're dealing with and who the players are, what the past problems have been. You have to learn to read between the lines of a lot of those reports. You have to communicate that information to other people.
That communication included making the lead issue so highly visible that people would be forced. Their tactics included issuing warnings to the community of potential hazards, disrupting Dallas City Council meetings, and even picketing the local EPA.
Keep, as Bill Clinton would say, a laser focus on what you're doing, what your goal is. Keep your eyes on the prize, so to speak, and not let a lot of people who don't know anything tell you different.
The president of Murmur over here still owns the property. They don't want you to have any kind of defacement on their properties.
Well, this property's not worth anything.
Well, I don't. That's immaterial. What I'm talking about, as long as they're the owners of it, they can say what they want to say about defacing the property. And of course, let me finish right now. On the public sidewalk, I can't stop you from walking on the public sidewalk.
Why don't you tell them how come
I'm not into that.
you polluted my community?
I'm not into that.
How come you still polluting my
I'm not
community?
into that.
You should be, sir.
I'm not.
Because we're supposed to beautify that.
Well, I can't sit here and I'm back and bicker with you 1 second. Okay? Have a good day. Thank you much.
Next time you don't have to send so many officers. We're very peaceful.
Sir, we get paid. That's what we're here.
To protect me or to protect the company?
This is the community.
You went.
Never been arrested. I've been but I'm at the point right now that this community needs this attention so bad of what's going on here that I would be arrested if I need be. I don't want looking for it, and I try to avoid everything we can with the officers, but this city and this community, the Texas Water Commission, EPA, they need to know that we'll go whatever extent we need to go to.
As the coalition gained support, they all nerved some people. In 1991, the Dallas Morning News obtained a confidential, unsigned memo written by an EPA official expressing the desire to disarm their most vocal critic. We do not expect to overcome Sepulveda, the memo said, but we can focus on the silent majority, and at some point, they will turn against him.
Was I such a big threat? When they come in at this point, we cannot stop Sepulveda, but we can garner the silent majority. And I'm saying, what in the world what type of government have we? I thought it was a government for the people, not to con the people.
At the time, EPA spokesman Roger Meacham responded to the memo by saying, quote, "It was probably someone's personal notes from one of the hundreds of meetings that do not reflect official agency policy or action." Luis himself admits he raised ire.
I don't think anybody would ever confuse him with being a member of the diplomatic corps. He's very hard-headed. He's stubborn. He knows what he wants, and he is absolutely fearless, which is a plus and a minus at times. I've seen him both ways.
Luis believes that fighting takes strength, and that it was faith that kept him focused and provided the will to go on.
There is no doubt in my mind that God had been in the driver's seat bus. It might sound very foolish to you, but I knew since back in 1987 I was going to do this.
Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray! We have won the battle, and we're going after the war now.
In May 1993, West Dallas won Superfund status. Even on the day of the announcement, Luis continued the spirit of the battle, arguing at a public forum that his community deserved recognition for helping to bring about this victory.
You bring no fear to me.
I don't expect you because you are already feared. Because you've done nothing here.
We here today.
If we didn't bring it, you would not be here today if we didn't bring what we did bring.
The significance locally is that they have finally gotten the federal authorities to admit a lead problem in West Dallas, that the denial is now over, and that they are going to have to fight as hard, if not harder, over the next decade to get this community cleaned up. They're going to have to fight for the money and have to fight for a decent cleanup plan.
And that means keeping the heat on the federal government, claiming that if they don't, things will never happen.
The people fighting for cleanup felt that the buck stopped with them, the ones who really had to draw the attention to the problem, prove that there was a problem, and then really supervise very carefully the cleanup.
The community also recognized when the lead-related problems are cleaned up, there are other industries alive, well, and still polluting.
I just recently saw a quote in the paper the other day from some EPA or city folks that said, well, we'll just, once we get the lead out, it'll be okay. And that's a big lie. That's totally misleading. Once you get the lead out of West Dallas, there are 69 other industries that are doing things involving toxic or hazardous materials there next to people that need to be looked at. So if you just move the lead out of Dallas and think that's going to take care of it, you're wrong.
Still, West Dallas residents feel there's now a glimmer of hope and much to be learned from what they've achieved. There's a unity among neighbors that extends far beyond battling a lead problem. It's an empowered team fighting for the quality of life.
I think once people find out what the real dangers of environmental injustice are, a lot of people will really get involved. Because we often say that the issue of environmental racism is an issue of life and death. It's just not an issue of some form of prejudice where somebody doesn't like you because of the color of your skin. This is an issue that will take your life away if you don't get involved.
People in the environmental justice movement have learned a lot from those who fought for civil rights. To be successful requires organization, education, visibility, and the persistence to fight until your voice is heard. Ira Flato, thanks for joining us.